Welcome to the C.S. Joseph podcast. I'm your host, C.S. Joseph, and this is season 30, episode 4, The Hypocrisy of an ENFJ. ENFJs are a very complex organism when it comes to hypocrisy. Already, you know that they have a general hypocrisy problem just by virtue of them being a Templar type. But their hypocrisy is actually very subtle. It's very subtle because of how easily covered up with their FE hero it really is. And that can actually lend a lot of problems when having a relationship or an interaction or an acquaintance or a friendship with an ENFJ over time. You just don't really know when it's going to rear its ugly head. And because they're able to conceal their hypocrisy so well in the eyes of other people due to a combination of SE child and extroverted feeling hero, it's really hard for them to take criticism because they're used to being the one who criticizes others, and they're completely not used to being the one who is criticized themselves. And this can end up becoming a compounding problem for an ENFJ, especially when you consider TI inferior. TI inferiors are like the classic, they're the know-it-all, even though they don't know anything. That's a hypocrisy of an ENFJ right there. And they often come off as these know-it-alls on a regular basis, and it can be very trying and very difficult for them because they like to see themselves as these social masters, but they just don't understand how alienating they can become when they come off like a know-it-all. And it's hard. It's very, very hard. Being a know-it-all might be the only real overt way to spot an ENFJ and their hypocrisy. The rest of it is extremely subtle. It's very behind the scenes. The reason why is they have an INFP shadow, and that shadow is behind the scenes. It is very hidden. It's not really, they're like chameleons. They're like social chameleons. These ENFJs, and it's important to know their hypocrisy because it'll give you an opportunity to criticize them properly. But like I said, they're super sensitive to criticism because already they're afraid of being stupid. They're already afraid that they don't know the truth as is. So they overcompensate with caring for other people or with additional research as much as they can so that they can shake the feeling that they're not stupid anymore, so they can actually feel smart, etc. Because that's all an ENFJ wants to do is feel smart, etc. The problem is that they end up becoming just another cog in the Dunning-Kruger effect wheel or system, which is the dumb people think they're smart and the smart people think they're dumb. Which one do you think the ENFJs are on? I think by default, they start out in life as a dumb person who thinks they're smart, and they have to work their entire life to get to the other side. They end up becoming a smart person who thinks they're dumb, which is really aggravating if you think about it. It's really, really aggravating. Granted, through TI aspirational, they can be the most intelligent out of all of us with their ability to process things. But if they're not going to spend any time sitting there and listening and instead spend all their time dictating to others their thinking for them and the truth for them and what is socially acceptable, etc., then they're not really going to get anywhere in life. And that's another hypocrisy of an ENFJ right there. They have this thing where they won't even consider whether or not something is true or false unless first it's socially acceptable, which is one of the most frustrating things. Because guess what? Just because something is socially acceptable does not mean that it's true. But that's a hypocrisy that ENFJs have to deal with on a consistent basis, especially in their youth. They haven't just had enough suffering in their life yet to realize that what is socially acceptable may not actually be accurate. And that's a problem. That's a serious problem. You know, like within my own life and my own experiences, especially with my father, etc., I would say for him, it's not so much about society as much as it's about church culture. He would oftentimes, like, from his point of view, something could only be true if church culture was willing to, if it was socially acceptable by church culture first, basically. That's why it had to have this whole aspect or this point of view known as the Christian kosher. For something to be kosher, basically comes in, confirms that food is prepared in a certain way that meets their religious standards, and then he says a prayer, blesses the food as kosher, and then puts the kosher label on the food and it's sold. And everyone who buys that food knows that that food is not going to violate their personal belief system, especially with the food laws that they have to follow. That's what kosher means. That's what kosher does. But kosher, to a point, can also be a challenge when it comes to, handling just day-to-day decisions, any decision. And it's interesting because you notice that ENFJs are looking for a kosher standard in their life to live by. They want the kosher. They want to be kosher. They want everything to be kosher. And I'm using this as a figure of speech, not actual real life kosher. I'm saying like they want an overarching standard that they can follow where they are guaranteed success every single time. And they don't want to spend any time having to figure it out on their own, because then that would mean like, that would be too much effort. It would hurt their brain, basically. It would cause them stress. So they are constantly trying to avoid that stress, avoid the stress of thinking. So having that kosher standard makes them feel like, hey, I'm always going to get the outcome that I'm looking for, and I never have to worry about it. And then I just teach people about the kosher standard, and everyone will be happy, right? Wrong. That's not actually remotely true at all. But early in life, ENFJs think it is true. And this is one of the most frustrating things. And oftentimes, you have ENFJs teaching people kosherisms their whole life that they themselves either don't practice or they themselves have never even actually verified whether or not that kosherism is something that should be taught to other people. And then they come off like this know-it-all because they're talking about how much they know about the kosherism, but they don't even understand the reason why behind the kosherism. They don't understand the principle behind the kosherism to begin with, and they can't explain the principle. And that's the issue. And they worry about the fact that they worry about how like they don't they worry about their self-worth, that they feel unworthy to begin with. And that's why they surrender to the kosherisms. They surrender to whatever cultural or social standard that is acceptable around them, because they already are in a mental position where they can't accept themselves. So they surrender themselves to the social standard or the social norms of the collective or the community that they're in, because they already feel like they're not worthy enough. And if it takes them their whole life to get to a point where they're willing to challenge that community social mindset and adopt their own mindset because they never benefited from having that mindset, at least not really, etc., and that can be super frustrating. I mean, they even take it right into their families. My father and my wife's dad, they're both ENFJs, and they both have the same problem where they have to be strong for the family. And this is a huge point of hypocrisy, because while they're being strong for their kids and strong for their wives and strong for their church and strong for the community, etc., well, they end up saying one thing. They pay us lip service, but then they just do something else completely else. And it's like their TI already deep down, their subconscious, their ICP subconscious doesn't even agree with the social standard to begin with, because it is pragmatic. So then they give that social standard to everybody else and make everybody else live by that standard. But they're smart enough that they can live on whatever standard that they agree with for themselves. And they can pick pieces of that standard, because from their point of view, oh, this standard overall in general is good, so you could live your life like that. But me, I'm smarter than you because I have TE Demon, and TE Demon just automatically assumes everyone else around me is stupid. And because everyone else around me is stupid, they're just going to have to be like sheep and follow the overarching social standard of our community, while I get to nitpick because I'm smart. I get to nitpick that social standard to fit what I want it to do, and I'm going to use only what I agree with and not what I disagree with, while taking away everyone else's opportunity to nitpick, challenge, or even have a voice within the community when it comes to the social standard that they themselves are trying to protect. Liars, hypocrites. ENFJs are literally, there's no different, they are literally becoming the thing they are sworn to destroy. It's so frustrating. I hate it. I fucking hate it. My father does this to me all the time. Always telling me to be a good Christian boy all the time. But then I see him not even following it all the way. And then he just comes off as a super know-it-all who thinks that he knows better than me, and he's got to be strong for me and enforce this social standard for my benefit, but he himself won't even follow it himself. My father-in-law is the exact same way, except for him, he doesn't follow the social culture of the church. He follows the social culture of schools and government and big government. That's what he cares about. And he bows and worships at the feet of big government constantly. And authoritarianism. And while he secretly hates the authority of the government, he's telling everyone else around them to follow said authority. He's a hypocrite. It's the most annoying thing in the world that ENFJs do this. And they're not even aware of it. How would they be aware of it? They're extremely external human beings. They have every hero and every child, which means they're very external. They don't have any introverted sensing. They don't have any introverted feeling. And introverted feeling, introverted sensing is what it takes for someone to actually have an inner world, to actually really truly know themselves and where they've been. They can't even keep track of their own failures. They're actually trying to forget their own failures and forget how much of a failure they actually are. When the reality situation is, if they would actually spend a hard, long time trying to remember their failures all the time, they would end up failing less because they would remember how they failed previously. But no, we can't do that. I'm too afraid to remember my failures. I don't want to feel like a piece of shit every day. Okay, you hypocrite. And then you keep failing other people in your life because you won't even take the time to write down how you failed. One of the biggest exercises that I do for ENJs is I tell them in my coaching practice, I tell them that they have to have a book of failures. Every time they fail, they have to write it down, and they have to review that book of failures. And they have to re-experience and relive all those failures all over again. I don't care if it makes them cry. I don't care if it makes them feel depressed. They have to do it. Because it's the only way to keep them from failing. Because they have to learn from where they've been in order to have a future tomorrow. And that future tomorrow ain't going to be here if they're in a consistent pattern of failure. It's one of the reasons why my father-in-law just has no clue how abusive and how cruel he actually is. Or my father has no clue how ignorant he actually is. If it doesn't have a Christian stamp on it, he's not interested in listening to it. It took me a year to get him to read one Rollo Tomassi book. Rollo Tomassi published 4 books on red pill thinking for masculinity because one of the biggest problems I have with my father is that he is teaching feminism and destroying masculinity from the pulpit of his church every goddamn Sunday. I hate it. And it wasn't until I told him that, Dad, Rollo Tomassi, he's a Christian and he is really, really a huge proponent of the faith and really cares about the Bible. And he wrote Volume 4, The Rational Male Religion. And I got it for you, Dad. And only then did my father actually bother to sit down and read it. Pathetic. I hate this. I hate this about ENFJs. I hate their hypocrisy. I hate it. Wake up. You guys do this all the time, and you haven't even a clue you do it. You don't even have a clue how you come off because people just tolerate you, and they tolerate you because they know that they can take advantage of you because you're so giving, and it's so easy to guilt you into doing things you don't want to do. And people just take advantage of you because it's like, okay, yeah, I'll just tolerate the fact that he's a know-it-all and put a carrot in front of him to make him think that he's going to move up in his position here at this organization or at this church or at this school or at this job or at this nonprofit organization. But the reality is, we're just going to use him and take him for everything he's got because we don't care about listening to him to begin with. We're just going to use him for what we can get out of him because he's so caring or whatever. Well, him being caring and helping us is more important and worth us standing around and tolerating his stupid know-it-all kosherisms that no one actually cares about and everyone knows he doesn't even follow. Wow. That means, ENFJs, other human beings are willing to tolerate your cruelty because of how helpful you are. But as soon as you decide to not be helpful to them anymore, whoosh, you're out. Which means they weren't even truly loyal to you to begin with. Right? Right? Here's another hypocrisy. ENFJs expect everyone else to listen to them, but they won't listen to anybody. They are chief above all in taking away other people's voices. And the only voice they care about being heard is theirs. And they only talk about how, everyone has a voice. They're only saying that for their own benefit. But as soon as they have a voice and they say what's on their mind, then they walk away not caring what anyone else has to say. Which leads them to creating an echo chamber in their own head. Because they're ending up becoming an ignorant TI user because they're making decisions based on either old information that they refuse to update or old information because they keep forgetting the new information because of SI trickster because they won't bother to write anything down, hypocrites, while expecting everyone else to write things down for them, hypocrites. Or they make decisions based on preferred information they want to hear. That's my dad. He makes decisions based on preferred information. My father-in-law makes decisions based on old information. He refuses to update himself. My father just has an echo chamber because he just wants to hear what his itching ears want to hear. And if he heard me saying that, he'd be really hurt with me saying that because I'm literally quoting the Bible when I say that. I'm quoting Thessalonians. Yeah, Dad, that's your problem. You only gather up for yourself teachers to teach you what your itching ears want to hear. All the while, you take away everybody else's voice and you refuse to actually listen. And you are the most dismissive person I've ever met in my entire life. Which of you ENFJs are also just as submissive? I'd probably venture to guess all of you. See, a good ENFJ, a great ENFJ, an ENFJ who is aware of their own hypocrisy would go out of their way to make themselves the student at all times. To the point where, through being this student, that they are devoted to listening to other people because they know that they can't teach anybody anything unless they become the student first. And they are a constant student and a student for the rest of their life so that they can maintain their position of teaching. That's not my dad. My dad's not that way because of preferred input. Tell me, how can you be a student if you're going to gather up for yourselves teachers to teach you what you want to hear? It's got to have that Christian label on it. It's got to have that dab of Jesus. You know what I'm saying? If it don't have that dab of Jesus, I'm not interested in hearing it. Come on. Look, do you know what I do as the firstborn son of my father? Let me tell you what I do. I go out of my way to read books that I disagree with. I read nonfiction, first and foremost. I don't read much fiction. It's very rare I read fiction. The last fiction book I read was Snow Crash, probably my most favorite fiction book of all time, other than Dune. And then I read a bunch of nonfiction. And what percentage of nonfiction do I read is based on something that I actually disagree with? I'd say 80% of what I read is stuff that I disagree with. I read Morals and Dogma by Albert Pike. I disagree with that. But that's why I wanted to read it. I read Manly P. Hall. I read Elena Blavatsky. I read everything about Theosophy. I all disagree with it. I read the Quran. Disagree with it. I read Hadith. Very disagree with it. Like, there's no difference between Hadith and the Council of Nicaea and Trent, by the way. And people who think otherwise, you need to, grow up. Seriously, grow up. Understand that. But the point is I just, people put so much faith into old men voting on things. They put so much faith into that instead of actually trying it out for themselves, experimenting, verifying, seeing if the principle is actually true or not. That's what TPs do. But FJs, like the ENFJ, like my dad and my My father-in-law, they both can't do that. They can't do that at all because they got to sell me on this kosherism while looking like a know-it-all. I mean, if you're a student, if you're this forever student as an ENFJ, so that because you already are a teacher, that means you're not going to come off like a know-it-all to everyone. But this is just how alienating my father is and my father-in-law. They're so alienating. Well, guess what? I even had I've had ENFJs like be my boss in certain situations. I worked at a grocery store one time, and I had an ENFJ boss, and he was a Mormon. And his whole thing, he was telling me on the kosherism of Mormonism and how it's so great. And because I wasn't interested in it, he treated me like crap for the rest of the time that I worked there. I literally quit because of how abusive and how cruel he was. Because he was telling me I wasn't a moral person because I was choosing not to submit to his kosherism when I could tell he wasn't submitting to his own kosherism. He wasn't submitting to his own belief system anyway. And ENFJs can't help but do it because they have SI trickster. They don't have the steadfastness, the fortitude to follow it to the letter anyway. And their ISTP subconscious is demanding via the pragmatism because they're trying to become more pragmatic and trying to become more independent in their life while they're trying to make everybody else around them dependent in their life. They use their ego to basically enslave and make everyone else around them dependent on them or dependent on the system or dependent on the social norms or dependent on the community while they themselves don't even follow that and they're seeking their own independence, which is sick if you think about it. It is hypocrisy. Okay? Why are we talking about hypocrisy? Why is it important? Folks, I'm not doing this for ENFJs to watch this video. I want everybody else, the other 15 types, to watch this video so that they can criticize ENFJs. People need to be empowered to criticize them because they're so sneaky, because they get away with being cruel. They get away with being hypocrites because of how caring their effing hero is. Because my father-in-law's position is a deacon at the church. My father's position is a pastor of a church. They are often above reproach, socially speaking, which means they rarely get criticized. They rarely get criticized. And so that when they do get criticized, they get super sensitive about it. They get super ragey. They get super angry. How dare you take away my voice, blah, blah, blah. They walk all over you. And they just refuse to listen. And they're literally that person who just listens to respond and not listening, and it's not listening to understand. Okay? Welcome to the TI inferior of the ENFJ. Welcome to TE Demon, taking your voice away, automatically assuming that you are stupid, automatically assuming that you are beneath them. Because the gold standard of society, the gold standard for the sheeple is for the sheep, and you're a sheep. But I'm the wolf. I get to live my life the way I want to. I get to be independent. I get to be pragmatic as I learn to become more pragmatic with my ISTP subconscious over time. And I'm smarter than you. And because I'm smarter than you, and I can figure that out and navigate which parts of the social standard that I sell to everybody else, to all of the sheep. And because I'm a wolf, I don't have to follow it while everyone else does. ENFJs are literally a walking double standard. They are the worst at it of all of the 16 types. Insanely hypocritical when it comes to their double standards. And that, I mean, and seriously, my wife, she's an ESTP, she's pretty bad too, but guess what? She's mirrored her cruel, double standard father her whole life, and then she brings that abusive behavior into her marriage. You see? So it's not entirely her fault. She's a victim, just like he was a victim of his mother. And his mother's an INTJ. Oh, just you wait till we get to the INTJ episode. You're really going to enjoy that, folks. Really going to enjoy that. And, it's just ridiculous. Literally every ENFJ sees themselves as the wolf, and all of the other people in their life, including and especially those closest to them, they're sheep. Just watch how they treat people. And it's a fact. It's the worst form of hypocrisy that they have. It's the wolf-sheep syndrome, and they think they're the wolf and everyone else is a sheep. When the reality of the situation is they're actually the sheep. It's just really hard for them to consider that. But that's what happens when you rely on social norms and what is socially accepted before you think. Maybe you should think about why things are socially accepted and be able to explain the principles behind those things being socially accepted first and foremost before you actually accept those and before you actually make everybody else, the people you consider sheep in your life, the people you treat like sheep in your life. I don't care if you willfully think that whether or not you willfully know or think or believe that other people are sheep in your life, if you treat them like sheep, and chances are you do treat them like sheep, then you do. Because how you feel about people is how you treat them, ENFJs. That's reality. That's the truth. Look, here's another example. My dad and my father-in-law, especially my dad, there's this guy. His name was Jason. He went to church with us many, many years ago. This is probably about 30 years ago. And I was like 4 years old. I was like 4 or 5, 6 years old. This kid was coming to church and whatnot. And he ended up got stuck into drugs. He got into big trouble. He became a huge drug addict, walked out on his wife, that type of thing. Although, honestly, his wife was also being super hypergamous. So it's not all his fault as much as my father believes that it is all his fault. My dad also rejects the concept of hypergamy. So he also rejects the concept of solipsism. And he believes in the soulmate myth. And he also believes in gender equality. Okay, well, it is what it is. He also believes in sola scriptura. And me and him can't even agree on anything until we actually settle our debate on whether or not the Bible is the infallible holy word of God, because it isn't. And for some reason, he thinks it is. From my point of view, God's word equals the words of the prophets plus the words of Jesus minus mistranslation and minus biblical interpolation, which the majority of the NIV Bible is biblical interpolation. So there's not very much left over, is it, when you cut away all the fat? He can't accept that. But, it's socially acceptable to consider that the NIV is the infallible holy word of God, right? This is a pastor who is responsible for up to 300 people every Sunday. Really? I love my dad, don't get me wrong, but it's not going to stop me from honoring him because it's written, honor thy mother and father, and I am honoring him by criticizing him because no one else in his whole life would dare criticize him. Because of how helpful he is, because he is this community icon who raises money for people and is always there and helps them out with their vaccine exemptions and is willing to drive a distance to pick them up and when their car broke down or help them in their court case because they're looking at a felony or whatever and it wasn't their fault and he's there for them. Yeah, but it comes with a cost. It comes with a price. Because the fact that he does that is because he sees himself as the wolf coming to your rescue, you the sheep. That's the problem. This kid, Jason, I met him when I was 25, so about 20 years later. Yeah, so 20 years later, he came into my life and he came up to me. He's like, Chase, I'd really like to talk to your dad. I haven't seen him in a very, very long time. And I know, he had a problem with me then, etc. But I've changed. I cleaned up. I have a really high-paying job. I'm married. I have children. I'm a responsible human being. And I'd like to present myself to your father so that he can see that. So we can see how much I've grown, how much I've changed, how much of a better person I used to be than when I was a teenager. I'm like, yeah, sure. That night, I talked to my dad about it. I'm like, hey, I saw Jason. It's been a really, really long time. He said he'd really want to talk to you. He gave me his number. He wrote it down for me. Here's his number. I handed it to my dad. My dad took his number, ripped it up into shreds, threw it away, and said, I will never talk to that person ever again. So unforgiving. So unforgiving, my father. So unforgiving. I'm like, well, why? And my dad's like, well, he's a drug addict. I'm like, Dad, he was a drug addict. He's not a drug addict now. ENFJs have this problem where they need to give people room to change. But they don't. You do one bad thing in the eyes of the ENFJ and their TE demon will label you and that label will stick forever. And that's it. Because of what? One potential moral failure because you didn't follow the ethics of the community, that kosherism that the ENFJ is foisting upon you to agree to anyway. Because obviously the ENFJ is happy. Obviously the ENFJ's life is way better or. And I think that's why ENFJs often have this victim mindset oh, poor me, because everyone else is evil and I'm not, even though they treat themselves like the wolf and everyone else like sheep. This kid, it was 20 years. This kid had improved himself. He was a man worthy of respect. And my dad wouldn't even give him the time of day because my dad could only think about how much of a drug addict he was when he was a teenager. Because that's the problem with ENFJs. Another hypocrisy of theirs. They don't give people room to change. They don't. INFJs have a similar issue, and in some cases it can be far worse than INFJ, but that's just for door slamming and rejection. Whereas my dad, it's more like, he is not worthy. He is not worthy to be in my presence because everything he did at that point in time. And I'm like, Dad, were you ever a teenager? Did you ever do crazy stuff when you were a teenager? I know my dad did. It's not like my dad would ever admit to it because he's got to, be strong for me. He's got to be strong for the family. He's got to be strong for the church. He can't look weak. He's got to be strong for everybody else. Strong so that we can keep up the facade of the social norms of the community and the church. The facade of the social standard that the sheep must follow so that we shouldn't scare the sheep, even though he himself doesn't follow it because he's the wolf. Because he's the wolf, he has privilege. He has the privilege to not follow it because he's the only person in the room who's smart enough to determine what pieces of that social standard he's getting everyone else to live by that, he disagrees with himself. But he's not going to tell anyone because it's better for people to follow that social standard instead of not following that social standard because they'll at least get some benefit, even though there's a little bit of bad in that social standard. There's a little bit of poop in the brownies, but overall, having brownies is better than no brownies, so they should eat those brownies. Oh my God. That's like literally my father. And it's so funny to listen to one of the mortal enemies of my family, the pastor my father worked under up until I was in my early 20s, a man who took advantage of my dad and took advantage of my family and quite frankly is probably mostly responsible for destroying my childhood. This man would always use that in an argument to my dad about the whole poop and the brownies thing. And that was his number one criticism of my father. Well, that's my father. And folks, I'm using my father as an example here just to show you how bad ENFJs can get with their hypocrisy, just how bad it is. Not giving everyone else a room to change, while expecting everyone else to give them room to change, while expecting everyone else to consider them smart enough to be able to nitpick and choose which pieces of the social standards they preach apply to them, but then apply to everyone. Because from their perspective, their INFP shadow perspective, quantity is better than quality. And the more people I can get to follow this particular social standard or the social norms, the better. Even though I don't agree with all of the social standard myself and don't live by it myself. I only live by pieces of it, but not all of it. But other people around me, they're not smart enough to know the difference. So they should be following the social standard anyway, because at least it's better than nothing. That's so wrong, and that is so fucked up. It is so fucked up. But this is something that I have found over and over and over with ENFJs in my life. Consistently. And it's so hard. It's so hard to find a humble ENFJ that is committed to listening to people, listening to understand, not just listening to respond, that is committed to becoming more pragmatic and helping other people in their life be more pragmatic. That is what the mentor should be doing. The ENFJ should be freeing people from the shackles of society and pointing them to better principles that are rooted in pragmatism and not principles that are rooted in what is socially acceptable. Because what is socially acceptable is not always true. But at least the pragmatic challenges the affiliative. And it's through that challenge that the truth is revealed. But the ENFJ only allows themselves because they like, well, I only trust myself. I'm the only smart person here. They only allow themselves to do that. And they take on that, quote, burden, that burden for everyone else's sake. No. They should be leading people down that path because they should continue to be the student of pragmatism so that they can allow pragmatism to be the drive for them to help bolster or challenge the affiliative or the socially accepted social norms of society, community, or church. It's not hard. I don't get it. Like, I don't get why ENFJs can just be so pig-headed and so stuck in their ways. And they sound like these know-it-alls. And they know a lot about those social norms. And they'll enforce those social norms onto the people. But they themselves won't entirely accept that social norm 100%. And they won't live it 100% while telling everyone else that they have to. It's wrong. My father-in-law's the same way with the schools. Telling everyone about wearing masks and, mask mandates, fully supports mask mandates. Look, I'm not telling you that, like seriously, like in terms of the COVID vaccine, if you want to take the vaccine, go ahead, that's fine, that's your choice. But don't mandate it. Don't force people. Don't force anything. Let people make a choice. And don't segregate them or mistreat them because they made a choice. You should be celebrating the fact that they have the freedom of choice to begin with. And not mandating. But here my father-in-law is all about mandating. Even though he himself refuses to take a booster shot. But he's telling everyone else to. It's unbelievable. What's going on here? What's going on? It's ridiculous. It's completely ridiculous. Please understand that ENFJs are very, very capable of this. And it's so funny how I hear NFPs tell me consistently about how arrogant TI users are. And it's because NFPs are extremely close to NFJs, and they're really close to ENFJs, and how ENFJs treat people. And INFP, their golden pair, is the ENFJ, and they can see right through the ENFJ's bullshit. And this is what they're trying to warn people about when they call me arrogant. What they can't understand is that I have TI parent, and then they're dealing with a TI inferior, and that's completely different. Yet they just assume that because I'm similar with their TE, similar to the TI inferior of an ENFJ, that I'm just as arrogant and pompous as the ENFJ that they're used to, which is wrong. They're effectively judging me for the past or the pain or the sins of other people in their life, when I have literally nothing to do with it. That's not fair to me. Stop it, NFPs. Stop it. Should be more like Chris Taylor. Chris Taylor uses FE Critic to expose ENFJs who behave like this, because he's always telling me how much FE heroes ultimately almost always become the thing that they swear to destroy. Or they become that pragmatic thing that rejects the social norm that they teach to other people. And then they say one thing but do another. That's the number one hypocrisy of an ENFJ right there. You can always count on an ENFJ to say one thing, but do another. You can always count on that. And yet, they expect everyone else to be consistent. They expect everyone else to be loyal. But when it comes to them, they can say one thing, but do another because, they're smart enough, or they're smarter than you. They're the wolf, you're the sheep. And their TE demon just cannot fathom that other people might actually be smarter than them. It can take ENFJs their entire lives, or up until they get into their 60s or 70s, before they realize the errors of their ways. Sometimes it could go all the way to death. It's really sad. So if you spot an ENFJ being a hypocrite, crush them, light them on fire, and show them this video if you have to, and expose their hypocrisy to them consistently, so that they don't have to wait till the end of their life to understand the lessons of their hypocrisy and to change their ways. Criticize them, because people are either afraid to criticize them because of how cruel they are, or people just imagine ENFJs are above reproach, so they're not even criticized. ENFJs, out of all of the 16 types, are the least criticized of all the types, yet they behave the most critical. Wow. Unbelievable. And it's because of how little criticized they are. They actually believe their own bullshit. They actually believe, I see people getting criticized all the time, and I'm not criticized very much. That must mean that I automatically know more than other people about this, which means I have every right to criticize, and should be my job to criticize other people as a result of that. and tell them how they can change and tell them how they grow and tell them how they have to follow the social standard, even though I don't technically follow it, etc. But it's my job to do that, and that's what I'm going to do, because since I'm not being criticized that much, well, that must mean I'm a good guy. That must mean I'm a good person. That must mean I'm right. And because I'm right, I can give myself the authority over other people. ENFJs are the most authoritarian of the types. And it's that authority that they exercise by others, authority that they give themselves, that they promote themselves to, because people won't criticize them. People will not hold them accountable for their own hypocrisy, because people are sometimes afraid that the ENFJ will stop giving to them if you criticize them. Yeah, well, folks, maybe the reason why an ENFJ treats you like a sheep is because you behave like a sheep and you get dependent upon their help. And then because you're dependent, obviously the wolf is going to slap you around like the little bitch you are. So maybe you should go out of your way to be independent around the sheep or around the wolf, because then the wolf will see you as another wolf and the wolf will treat you with that much more respect. Don't you get it, folks? That's how bad it can get with ENFJ hypocrisy. That's how bad. And that's what I'm warning you for. You want to put a stop to that? You better criticize them. And you better make sure you're not dependent on them. You better make sure. Otherwise, you will have the biggest helping of cruelty that you've ever experienced in your entire life put upon you, as they elect themselves your better, as they elect themselves the authority in your life, as they elect themselves above reproach. If you found this lecture useful, helpful, educational, enlightening, please leave a comment below here in the membership portal. I'd like to get your feedback on this episode. I know that I'm being very brutal in these lectures, but when it comes to these things, it is necessary. The brutality is absolutely necessary as I expose all of the hypocrisies of all the 16 types so that all of you can criticize everybody else, because it is only through criticism that we will have healing, not through support. The best support you can offer someone is criticism. You want to save your family, you want to save your church, you want to save your community, you want to save your city, you want to save your state, you want to save your nation, start criticizing. And it's through these lectures I will give you the tools to criticize. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next episode.